Alex wasn't anyone special, not on the outside. He was the kind of guy you'd pass on the street and forget instantly. He had mousy brown hair that he never really styled, preferring to just run a hand through it in the morning. His clothes were always practical, never flashy. Jeans and a t-shirt were his uniform. He worked at a data entry job for a small insurance company, a job about as exciting as watching paint dry. He spent his days typing numbers into spreadsheets, a task that felt utterly meaningless. But inside, Alex was different. Inside, his mind was a whirlwind of code and algorithms, a playground of digital possibilities. He'd been fascinated by computers since he was a little kid, spending hours tinkering with them, learning how they worked, and discovering their hidden potential. While his classmates were playing sports or hanging out at the mall, Alex was teaching himself programming languages and exploring the depths of the internet. He was a natural, a prodigy hidden in plain sight. His apartment, a small, cramped space above a laundromat, was his sanctuary. It was filled with computer parts, wires, and screens, a testament to his passion. He'd built his own gaming rig, a powerful machine capable of running the most demanding games at max settings. He devoured books on cybersecurity and cryptography, always eager to learn more. Alex hated his job. He felt like his talent was being wasted, that he was capable of so much more. He dreamed of a life of luxury, of driving fast cars, living in a penthouse apartment, and traveling the world. He imagined himself sipping cocktails on a tropical beach, far away from the drudgery of his daily routine. He wanted to escape the ordinary and embrace the extraordinary. He saw his co-workers, people who seemed content with their mundane lives, and he couldn't understand it. They talked about their families, their weekend plans, their favorite TV shows. Alex couldn't relate. He felt like he was living in a different world, a world where anything was possible. He knew he was smart, maybe even smarter than most people. He just needed a way to unlock his potential, to turn his skills into something tangible. He needed a plan, a way to break free from the chains of his ordinary life and achieve the luxurious life he craved. He just didn't know how, not yet. But he was always looking, always searching for that one opportunity that would change everything. He was waiting for his moment to shine. He just needed a spark. He was confident it was coming, and he would be ready. The spark Alex was waiting for came in the form of a late-night coding session. He was idly browsing the website of Megamart, a giant online retailer that sold everything from electronics to groceries. He'd been a customer for years, buying computer parts and the occasional video game. But tonight, he wasn't shopping, he was exploring. Driven by boredom and a thirst for knowledge, he started examining the website's code, looking for weaknesses, for vulnerabilities. He knew that large companies like Megamart spent a lot of money on cybersecurity, but he also knew that no system was perfect. There was always a way in, a loophole, a hidden flaw. He focused on the refund system. It was a complex process, involving multiple databases and security protocols. But as he dug deeper, he noticed a pattern, a small inconsistency in the way refunds were processed. It was a tiny crack in the armor, almost invisible to the naked eye. Megamart, like many online retailers, offered refunds for damaged or unsatisfactory products. Customers could request a refund through the website, providing details about their purchase and the reason for the return. The system would then verify the information and issue a refund to the customer's account. Alex discovered that the system was vulnerable to manipulation. He realized that he could create fake refund requests, using altered order numbers and fabricated reasons for the return. He could trick the system into believing that he was a legitimate customer requesting a legitimate refund. At first, he was hesitant. He knew that what he was contemplating was illegal, a serious crime with potentially severe consequences. But the lure of easy money, the promise of a life of luxury, was too strong to resist. He told himself that he would only do it once, just to see if it worked. He created a fake account on Megamart, using a disposable email address and a prepaid credit card. He then placed a small order for a cheap item, a USB cable. Once the order was delivered, he requested a refund, claiming that the cable was defective. He carefully crafted his request, using technical jargon to make it sound convincing. To his surprise, the refund was approved almost instantly. The money was credited to his prepaid card within minutes. He couldn't believe how easy it was. He had successfully exploited the vulnerability in Megamart's refund system. A thrill surged through him, a mixture of excitement and fear. He knew that he had stumbled upon something big, something that could change his life forever. He decided to test the system again, this time requesting a larger refund for a more expensive item. And again, it worked. The floodgates were now open. Alex began to exploit the vulnerability on a larger scale, creating multiple fake accounts and requesting dozens of fraudulent refunds. He was careful to spread out the requests over time, to avoid raising any red flags. He was also meticulous in covering his tracks, deleting his browsing history and using encrypted connections. He was now a scammer, a thief, a criminal. But he didn't care. He was finally on his way to achieving the luxurious life he had always dreamed of. The taste of easy money was too sweet to resist, and he was determined to keep going, no matter the risk. He had found his golden ticket. At first, Alex kept the refund amount small, sticking to items under $100. He was testing the waters, making sure he wouldn't trigger any alarms. The money trickled in, slowly but steadily. He used it to pay off some of his debts and buy a few new computer parts. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him a taste of what was possible. As his confidence grew, so did his ambitions. He started targeting more expensive items, laptops, smartphones, even high-end cameras. He created more sophisticated fake accounts, using stolen identities and proxy servers to mask his location. He learned how to bypass Megamart's security measures, staying one step ahead of their detection systems. The money started pouring in. Thousands of dollars a week, then tens of thousands. Alex couldn't believe how easy it was. He was living a double life. During the day, he was still Alex, the ordinary data entry clerk, typing numbers into spreadsheets and dreaming of a better future. But at night, he transformed into Zero Day, his online alias, a master hacker who was siphoning money from a giant corporation. He opened several offshore bank accounts in countries with strict banking secrecy laws. He transferred the money from his prepaid cards to these accounts, making it virtually untraceable. He was careful not to spend too much money in his own name, avoiding any large purchases that could raise suspicion. Instead, he started indulging in small luxuries, expensive dinners at fancy restaurants, weekend trips to nearby cities, and designer clothes that he wore only on special occasions. He bought a new car, a sleek sports coupe that he parked a few blocks away from his apartment, not wanting to draw attention to himself. He kept his apartment the same, a small, cramped space above the laundromat. He didn't want anyone to suspect that he had come into money. He continued to work at his data entry job, pretending to be just like everyone else. But inside, he was changing. The money was corrupting him, making him arrogant and reckless. He started taking bigger risks, targeting even more expensive items and creating bolder fake accounts. He felt invincible, untouchable. He started bragging to his friends, hinting at his newfound wealth. He told them about his investments and his successful side projects. He showed off his new clothes and his expensive watch. He even took them out for lavish dinners, picking up the tab without hesitation. His friends were impressed, but they were also suspicious. They knew that Alex didn't make much money at his data entry job. They started wondering where he was getting all this money from. Some of them asked him outright, but he always brushed them off with vague answers. Alex knew that he was playing a dangerous game, that he was living on borrowed time. But he couldn't stop. The lure of money was too strong, the thrill of the scam too addictive. He was trapped in a cycle of greed and deception, and he couldn't see a way out. He was living the high life, but it was built on a foundation of lies, a house of cards that could collapse at any moment. He just didn't know when. The higher he flew, the harder the fall would be. Meanwhile, miles away from Alex's cramped apartment and extravagant dinners, Detective Thomas Reynolds sat hunched over his desk, a mountain of paperwork threatening to bury him alive. Reynolds was a seasoned investigator, a veteran of the force with over 20 years of experience. He'd seen it all: murders, robberies, drug deals, you name it. He was a good cop, a dedicated cop, a cop who believed in justice. But Reynolds was also a bit old-fashioned. He preferred shoe leather to spreadsheets, gut instinct to algorithms. He trusted his gut, and his gut rarely led him astray. He was more comfortable interviewing witnesses in a smoky diner than analyzing data on a computer screen. He still carried a notepad and pen, even though most of his colleagues had switched to tablets. He was assigned the Megamart fraud case because it was becoming a major problem. The company had reported significant losses, millions of dollars siphoned away through fraudulent refunds. The higher-ups were putting pressure on the department to solve the case quickly and quietly. Reynolds stared at the computer screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. The case files were filled with technical jargon, IP addresses, proxy servers, encrypted connections. It was like reading a foreign language. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of digital data. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. He didn't understand this new world of cybercrime. He was used to dealing with real people, with tangible evidence, fingerprints, bloodstains, eyewitness accounts. This was different. This was abstract, intangible, a ghost in the machine. His partner, a young, tech-savvy detective named Sarah Chen, tried to explain the intricacies of the scam to him. She showed him how Alex was using fake accounts and proxy servers to hide his identity. She explained how he was exploiting the vulnerability in Megamart's refund system. Reynolds listened patiently, nodding occasionally, but he still didn't quite grasp it. He understood the basic concept, but the technical details were beyond him. He felt like he was missing something, a crucial piece of the puzzle. "It's like he's invisible, Detective," Chen said, frustration evident in her voice. "He's covering his tracks perfectly. We can't find any direct evidence linking him to the fraudulent accounts." Reynolds sighed. "There's always a trace, Sarah," he said. "Everyone makes mistakes. We just have to find his." He decided to approach the case from a different angle. He started looking at the bigger picture, trying to understand the motive behind the scam. Who would benefit from this? Who had the skills and the opportunity to pull it off? He knew that the perpetrator was likely someone with advanced computer skills, someone who understood the inner workings of online retail systems. He also knew that the perpetrator was likely motivated by greed, by the desire for money and power. He started interviewing Megamart employees, asking them about security protocols and potential vulnerabilities. He talked to cybersecurity experts, trying to get a better understanding of the technical aspects of the case. He was making progress, slowly but surely. He was starting to piece together the puzzle, to see the outline of the picture. But he still needed that one crucial piece of evidence, that one slip-up that would lead him to the culprit. He just didn't know where to find it. The sophisticated nature of the fraud made it seem like an impossible case to crack using his traditional methods. He was going to have to adapt, to learn to speak the language of the digital world, if he wanted to catch this tech-savvy thief. Back in his small apartment, Alex was losing his grip on reality. The adrenaline rush of the scam, the constant flow of money, it was all going to his head. He started to believe his own hype, convinced that he was smarter than everyone else, that he was untouchable. He couldn't resist the urge to flaunt his wealth, even in subtle ways. He started wearing designer clothes to work, expensive watches that peeked out from under his sleeves. He traded in his old, beat-up backpack for a sleek leather briefcase. He even started getting his hair styled at a fancy salon, ditching his usual, run a hand through it, routine. His neighbors noticed the changes. Mrs. Rodriguez, the kindly old woman who lived across the hall, raised an eyebrow when she saw him carrying a shopping bag from a high-end clothing store. "New job, Alex?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity. Something like that, Alex replied, flashing a confident smile. He didn't elaborate, but he knew that she was wondering where he was getting all the money. His friends were even more suspicious. They saw him driving his new sports car, a bright red coupe that stood out like a sore thumb in their working-class neighborhood. They saw him wearing expensive clothes and eating at fancy restaurants. They knew that something was up. "Come on, Alex, spill the beans," his friend Mark said one night, as they were having drinks at a local bar. "What's going on? Did you win the lottery or something?" Alex laughed, a nervous, forced laugh. "I told you, man, I've been investing," he said. "I'm just good with money." Mark didn't believe him. He knew that Alex was lying. He could see it in his eyes. "Yeah, right," he said, shaking his head. "Whatever you say." Alex's arrogance was starting to alienate his friends. They felt like he was looking down on them, that he had forgotten where he came from. They started avoiding him, tired of his bragging and his vague explanations. Even at work, his newfound confidence was attracting attention. His boss, Mr. Henderson, noticed that he was dressing differently, that he was more assertive and outspoken. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something about Alex had changed. "Everything all right, Alex?" Mr. Henderson asked one day, as Alex was leaving for lunch. "You seem different lately." "Everything's great, Mr. Henderson," Alex replied, his voice a little too enthusiastic. "Never been better." Mr. Henderson narrowed his eyes, studying Alex's face. He didn't believe him either. He suspected that Alex was hiding something, but he didn't know what. Alex was walking a tightrope, balancing his double life with increasing difficulty. The more he flaunted his wealth, the more attention he attracted, the greater the risk of getting caught. He knew that he was playing with fire, but he couldn't help himself. He was addicted to the thrill of the scam, to the feeling of power and control. He was living the high life, but he was also living on the edge, one wrong move away from disaster. His increasing confidence was blinding him to the danger, making him careless and complacent. He was so focused on enjoying the fruits of his illegal labor that he was neglecting the very thing that had kept him safe, his meticulous attention to detail. He was about to learn a hard lesson: even the smartest criminals can be undone by a simple mistake. The day started like any other. Alex woke up, checked his bank accounts, which had ballooned to an obscene amount, and plotted his next move. He'd just successfully pulled off a series of high-value refunds, netting him close to $50,000. He felt like celebrating. He decided to treat himself to an expensive coffee at the Daily Grind, a trendy cafe known for its artisanal blends and its exorbitant prices. It was the kind of place he would have only dreamed of visiting a few months ago. Now, he strolled in like he owned the place, radiating confidence. He ordered a Kopi Luwak latte, the most expensive drink on the menu, and settled into a plush armchair by the window. He opened his laptop and began planning his next scam, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was in his element, a master of the digital world. When his coffee arrived, he paid with one of his prepaid cards, barely glancing at the receipt. He was too focused on his work, too absorbed in his own brilliance. He took a sip of the latte, savoring the rich, exotic flavor. He felt like a king. After a couple of hours, he finished his coffee and closed his laptop. He gathered his belongings, eager to get back to his apartment and start transferring the funds to his offshore accounts. He stood up, grabbed his briefcase, and headed for the door. In his haste, he absent-mindedly left the paper receipt on the table. It was a small, insignificant piece of paper, easily overlooked. Most people wouldn't have given it a second thought. But this receipt was different. It contained a partial transaction number, a string of digits that could potentially be traced back to his prepaid card. He didn't even notice that he had left it behind. He was too preoccupied with his own success, too confident in his own abilities. He walked out of the cafe, oblivious to the fact that he had just made a fatal mistake. The receipt fluttered on the table, a silent witness to his crime. It sat there for several minutes, unnoticed by the other customers and the staff. It was just a piece of trash, a discarded remnant of a brief transaction. But fate had other plans. A meticulous barista named Emily, a young woman with a keen eye for detail, started clearing the table. She picked up the empty coffee cup and the crumpled napkin. Then, she saw the receipt. She almost threw it away, but something caught her eye. It was the partial transaction number, a series of digits that looked vaguely familiar. She couldn't quite place it, but it sparked a flicker of recognition in her mind. Emily was a bit of a numbers person. She had a knack for remembering details, for noticing patterns. She had also heard about the Megamart fraud case that was making headlines. She knew that the police were looking for a tech-savvy scammer who was siphoning millions of dollars from the online retailer. A thought crossed her mind: could this receipt be connected to the fraud case? Could this seemingly insignificant piece of paper be the key to unlocking the mystery? She decided to take a closer look. It was a long shot, but she had a feeling that something was amiss. That coffee had cost more than a normal coffee would, and she remembered the customer being a little strange. She carefully placed the receipt in her pocket, a tiny piece of evidence that would soon unravel Alex's carefully constructed world. After her shift ended, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the receipt was important. She kept replaying the scene in her mind: the expensive coffee, the well-dressed man, the partial transaction number. It all seemed too coincidental. She remembered Alex clearly. He stood out from the usual crowd of students and freelancers who frequented the daily grind. He had an air of confidence, almost arrogance, that she found off-putting. He was also a generous tipper, which was unusual for someone who looked like he was working on a laptop all day. She pulled the receipt out of her pocket and examined it closely. The partial transaction number was printed in a small, almost illegible font. She carefully copied it down onto a piece of paper, making sure she didn't make any mistakes. She decided to do some research. She went home and fired up her computer. She searched online for information about the Megamart fraud case, reading news articles and police reports. She learned that the police were looking for a tech-savvy scammer who was using stolen credit card numbers to make fraudulent purchases. A chill ran down her spine. Could Alex be the scammer they were looking for? It seemed crazy, but the pieces were starting to fit together. She knew that she had to do something. She couldn't just ignore her suspicions. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should she call the police? Should she try to investigate on her own? She knew that getting involved could be dangerous, but she also knew that she couldn't live with herself if she did nothing. She decided to trust her instincts. She picked up her phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. She waited on hold for several minutes, her heart pounding in her chest. When someone finally answered, she identified herself and explained her suspicions. She told the officer about the receipt, the partial transaction number, and the man she saw at the daily grind. She described Alex as best she could, providing details about his appearance and his demeanor. The officer listened patiently, taking notes. He thanked her for her information and told her that he would pass it along to the detectives working on the Megamart fraud case. He warned her not to get involved any further, to leave the investigation to the professionals. Emily hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. She had done her part. She had reported her suspicions to the police. Now, it was up to them to investigate. She couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would the police take her seriously? Would they be able to track down Alex? Would he be brought to justice? She didn't know, but she hoped that she had made a difference, that she had helped to stop a criminal from getting away with his crimes. She had a gut feeling that this small receipt was the beginning of the end for Zero Day. The digital world had failed to catch him, but old-fashioned police work, spurred by a concerned citizen, might just do the trick. Detective Reynolds was having a bad day. He had spent the entire morning poring over computer logs and financial records, trying to find a connection between the fraudulent accounts and the real world. But he kept hitting dead ends. The scammer was too careful, too skilled at covering his tracks. Sarah Chen, his partner, was making progress, but even she was struggling. She had managed to trace some of the IP addresses back to proxy servers in foreign countries, but that was as far as she could go. The digital trail had gone cold. Reynolds was frustrated. He was used to solving cases with old-fashioned police work, interviewing witnesses, following leads, and trusting his gut. This cybercrime stuff was a different beast altogether. He felt like he was fighting a ghost, chasing shadows in the dark. Then, a report landed on his desk, a tip from a barista at the Daily Grind. Reynolds almost dismissed it out of hand. A coffee receipt? A partial transaction number? It seemed too trivial, too insignificant to be of any use. But then he remembered what he had told Sarah, everyone makes mistakes. We just have to find his. And this barista, Emily, seemed genuinely convinced that she had stumbled upon something important. Reynolds decided to trust his gut. He knew that it was a long shot, but he had nothing to lose. He was desperate for a break, any lead that could point him in the right direction. He decided to follow up on the barista's tip, to see if there was anything to it. He grabbed his coat and headed out the door. I'm going to check out this coffee shop lead, he told Sarah. It's probably nothing, but you never know. Sarah looked up from her computer screen, a skeptical expression on her face. Seriously, detective? A coffee receipt? I think we have bigger fish to fry. Maybe, Reynolds replied. But sometimes, the smallest clues can lead to the biggest breakthroughs. He drove to the Daily Grind and walked inside. He found Emily behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine. He introduced himself and showed her his badge. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. Detective Reynolds, she said. I didn't think you would actually come. I take all tips seriously, miss. Emily Carter, she supplied. Miss Carter, Reynolds continued. Tell me everything you remember about the man who left that receipt. Emily recounted her story, describing Alex in detail. She told Reynolds about his expensive coffee, his designer clothes, and his air of confidence. She also mentioned the partial transaction number on the receipt. Reynolds listened intently, taking notes in his notepad. He could sense that Emily was telling the truth. He could see the sincerity in her eyes. He started to believe that this coffee receipt might actually be something important. He asked Emily if she still had the receipt. She reached into her pocket and pulled it out, handing it to Reynolds. Reynolds examined the receipt carefully. The partial transaction number was faded and smudged, but he could still make it out. He compared it to the financial records from Megamart. To his surprise, the partial transaction number matched a series of fraudulent refunds that had been processed using a prepaid card. It was a breakthrough. Reynolds felt a surge of adrenaline. He had finally found a lead, a tangible piece of evidence that could connect the scam to a real person. He thanked Emily for her help and promised to keep her updated on the case. He had a feeling that this was just the beginning. The digital world hadn't given him anything, but this small-town barista had just handed him the key to the whole case. Back at the precinct, Reynolds felt a renewed sense of purpose. The coffee receipt had given him something tangible to work with, a thread to pull on that could unravel the entire scam. He showed the receipt to Sarah, who was still skeptical but couldn't deny the evidence. Okay, I'll admit it, she said. That's a pretty good lead. But it's just a partial transaction number. How are we going to trace it back to the scammer? We start with the prepaid card company, Reynolds replied. We find out who bought the card and where it was used. Sarah contacted the prepaid card company and explained the situation. They were initially reluctant to cooperate, citing privacy concerns, but Reynolds convinced them that it was a matter of public safety. He explained that the card was being used to commit fraud on a massive scale. The prepaid card company eventually agreed to provide them with the information they needed. They told Reynolds that the card had been purchased online using a disposable email address and a fake name. But they were able to trace the IP address of the purchase back to a specific location, Alex's apartment building. Reynolds felt a jolt of excitement. He was getting closer. He was finally closing in on the scammer. He ordered a surveillance team to be set up outside Alex's apartment building, to monitor his movements and gather more information. Meanwhile, Sarah was working on tracing the fraudulent accounts. She used the partial transaction number from the coffee receipt to identify a series of suspicious transactions that had been processed through Megamart's refund system. She discovered that the refunds had been credited to multiple prepaid cards, all of which had been purchased using fake names and disposable email addresses. But she noticed a pattern. The prepaid cards were all being used to make purchases at the same online retailers, electronics stores, clothing stores, and travel websites. She realized that the scammer was using the money from the fraudulent refunds to fund his lavish lifestyle. She also discovered that the prepaid cards were all being linked to the same offshore bank accounts. These accounts were located in countries with strict banking secrecy laws, making it difficult to trace the funds. However, Sarah was able to obtain a court order to access the bank records. She discovered that the accounts were being used to transfer large sums of money to other accounts, all of which were owned by shell corporations. She traced the money through a complex web of transactions, following the digital trail like a bloodhound. She eventually identified a series of accounts that were being used to purchase luxury goods and services, expensive cars, designer clothes, and exotic vacations. She realized that the scammer was living a double life, enjoying the fruits of his illegal labor while pretending to be an ordinary data entry clerk. She was determined to expose him, to bring him to justice for his crimes. The combination of her digital expertise and the detective's instincts was finally paying off. The small receipt was now leading them directly to 0 day. The net was closing. With Alex now firmly in their sights, Reynolds' team began a full-scale investigation into his life. They started by looking into his financial records, comparing his declared income with his spending habits. The inconsistencies were glaring. According to his tax returns, Alex was earning a modest salary as a data entry clerk. Yet, he was driving a sports car, wearing designer clothes, and eating at expensive restaurants. He was living a lifestyle that was far beyond his means. Reynolds interviewed Alex's boss, Mr. Henderson, who confirmed that Alex's salary was relatively low. He also mentioned that Alex had been acting strangely lately, that he had become more confident and assertive. "He's not the same guy he used to be," Mr. Henderson said. "Something's definitely changed." Reynolds also interviewed Alex's neighbors, including Mrs. Rodriguez, the kindly old woman who lived across the hall. She told Reynolds about Alex's new clothes and his expensive shopping bags. "He used to be such a quiet, unassuming young man," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Now, he's all flash and no substance." The team then turned its attention to Alex's computer activity. Sarah obtained a warrant to access his internet service provider records. She discovered that Alex had been visiting websites related to cybersecurity, cryptography, and online fraud. He had also been using proxy servers and VPNs to mask his IP address. She analyzed his browsing history and found evidence that he had been researching Megamart's refund system. He had been searching for vulnerabilities and loopholes in their security protocols. She also found evidence that he had been using disposable email addresses and fake names to create multiple accounts on Megamart's website. He had been using these accounts to request fraudulent refunds. Sarah discovered that Alex had been deleting his browsing history and clearing his cache on a regular basis. He was trying to cover his tracks, but he wasn't careful enough. She was able to recover some of the deleted data using forensic tools. The recovered data provided irrefutable evidence that Alex was the scammer they were looking for. It showed that he had the skills, the opportunity, and the motive to commit the Megamart fraud. Reynolds felt a sense of satisfaction. He had finally cracked the case. He had proven that even the most tech-savvy criminals can be brought to justice with old-fashioned police work and a little bit of luck. He ordered his team to prepare an arrest warrant for Alex. He wanted to catch him by surprise, before he had a chance to destroy any evidence or flee the country. The small coffee receipt had led them to this moment. A mistake so small, it was almost laughable. Alex, so careful with his digital footprint, had been tripped up by a piece of paper. It was almost poetic. Reynolds smiled. It was time to bring 0 Day down. Alex had grown complacent. He was so used to getting away with his scam that he had started to believe he was untouchable. But deep down, a nagging voice kept telling him that it couldn't last forever. That voice grew louder when he noticed the black sedan parked across the street from his apartment building. It had been there for a few days, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the car belonged to someone else. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was under surveillance. He became paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder, scrutinizing every face he saw. He started avoiding his usual haunts, afraid of being recognized. He even stopped going to the daily grind, worried that the barista might remember him. He knew that something was wrong. He could feel it in his gut. He had a sinking feeling that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. He decided to take action. He logged into his offshore bank accounts and began transferring the remaining funds to other accounts, scattering the money like seeds in the wind. He hoped that this would make it more difficult for the authorities to trace the money back to him. He also started deleting files from his computer, shredding evidence of his online activities. He erased his browsing history, cleared his cache, and deleted any emails or documents that could incriminate him. He worked feverishly, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that he was running out of time. He could feel the noose tightening around his neck. But it was too late. The police were already onto him. They had traced the prepaid card to his apartment building. They had interviewed his boss and his neighbors. They had accessed his internet service provider records. They knew everything. As Alex was frantically deleting files, Sarah Chen was sitting at her computer, watching his every move. She had installed a keystroke logger on his computer, allowing her to monitor his activity in real time. She saw him transferring the funds to his offshore accounts. She saw him deleting files from his computer. She knew that he was trying to cover his tracks, but she was one step ahead of him. She alerted Reynolds, who ordered his team to move in and arrest Alex immediately. They couldn't risk letting him destroy any more evidence or flee the country. As Alex was preparing to leave his apartment, the police burst through the door. He was caught completely off guard. He didn't have time to react. He was arrested and taken into custody. His computer was seized and taken to the precinct for forensic analysis. His offshore bank accounts were frozen. His dream of a luxurious life was shattered. He had flown too close to the sun, and his wings had melted. His carelessness, his arrogance, had finally caught up to him. The game was over. 0 Day had been defeated. All thanks to a barista and a coffee receipt. With Alex in custody, Reynolds' team descended upon his small apartment. The place was a mess, a stark contrast to the carefully curated image he had been projecting to the world. Clothes were strewn across the floor, takeout containers littered the coffee table, and computer parts were scattered everywhere. Sarah Chen led the forensic team, meticulously searching for evidence of the scam. They seized Alex's computer, his hard drives, and his mobile phone. They also found a stack of prepaid cards, hidden in a shoebox under his bed. As they dug deeper, they uncovered a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. They found detailed records of his fraudulent transactions, including spreadsheets listing the fake accounts he had created and the refunds he had requested. They found copies of the disposable email addresses he had used, as well as the proxy server configurations he had set up to mask his IP address. They even found a handwritten notebook filled with passwords, usernames, and account numbers. It was a goldmine of information that would help them trace the money back to its source. Amidst the digital clutter, Reynolds spotted a small, crumpled piece of paper lying on the desk. It was the coffee receipt from the daily grind. He carefully picked it up, recognizing the partial transaction number printed on it. He showed the receipt to Sarah, who smiled knowingly. "That's it," she said. "That's the piece of evidence that started it all." The receipt became a key piece of evidence in the case, linking Alex directly to the fraudulent accounts. It proved that he had been at the daily grind on the day that the fraudulent transactions were processed. It also provided a crucial link between him and the prepaid card that was used to make the purchase. The forensic team also found evidence that Alex had been researching ways to launder money and evade taxes. He had been trying to hide his ill-gotten gains from the authorities. They discovered that he had been transferring money to offshore bank accounts in countries with strict banking secrecy laws. He had been using shell corporations to disguise the true ownership of the accounts. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no doubt that Alex was the mastermind behind the Megamart fraud. He had used his computer skills and his knowledge of online security to steal millions of dollars from the company. The police also interviewed Alex's friends and neighbors, who provided additional details about his lavish lifestyle and his suspicious behavior. They confirmed that he had been living beyond his means and that he had been acting strangely lately. The case against Alex was airtight. The evidence was irrefutable. He had been caught red-handed, thanks to a careless mistake and a meticulous barista. The digital world had failed to protect him. In the end, it was a simple piece of paper that brought him down. Reynolds, holding the receipt, felt a sense of closure. Sometimes, the simplest things were the most powerful. Even in the age of computers and the internet. A paper receipt, a chance encounter, and a gut feeling had solved a multi-million-dollar crime. He couldn't help but smile. Alex sat in the interrogation room, his head in his hands. He couldn't believe how it had all gone wrong. He had been so careful, so meticulous. He had thought of everything. But in the end, it was a simple coffee receipt that had brought him down. Reynolds sat across from him, his expression unreadable. He placed the coffee receipt on the table between them. "Recognize this?" he asked. Alex didn't answer. He knew that it was over. He had been caught. There was no point in denying it. "You thought you were so smart, Alex," Reynolds said. "You thought you could outsmart the system. But you made a mistake. A simple, careless mistake. And that's all it took." Alex looked up at Reynolds, his eyes filled with despair. "I just wanted a better life," he said. "I wanted to escape this nothingness." "You could have done it the right way," Reynolds replied. "You could have used your skills for good, not for evil." Alex was formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. The charges carried a maximum sentence of several decades in prison. He was denied bail and remanded into custody. The story of Alex's downfall made headlines around the world. The media portrayed him as a tech-savvy criminal who had been undone by his own arrogance. They marveled at the fact that a simple coffee receipt had led to his arrest. The case became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most sophisticated criminals can be brought to justice with a little bit of luck and a lot of hard work. It highlighted the importance of paying attention to detail, of not becoming complacent, of not underestimating the power of the real world. It showed how even in the digital age, old-fashioned police work still mattered. It demonstrated that human intelligence and gut instinct could be just as effective as algorithms and data analysis. The story resonated with people because it was a reminder that even the most complex problems can have simple solutions. It showed that sometimes, the key to solving a mystery is right in front of our eyes, waiting to be discovered. Alex's story served as a warning to other would-be criminals. It showed that crime doesn't pay, that even the most elaborate schemes will eventually unravel. It demonstrated that the pursuit of wealth and power at any cost is a dangerous path that can lead to ruin. It also highlighted the importance of ethical behavior and personal responsibility. It showed that even in a world where technology is constantly evolving, the fundamental values of honesty, integrity, and respect for the law remain essential. Alex's downfall was a tragedy, but it was also a triumph. It was a triumph for justice, for the rule of law, and for the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity. It proved that even the most tech-savvy criminals can be undone by a simple, real-world mistake. It was a lesson learned the hard way, a price paid for greed and arrogance. The story of Zero Day was over. The story of Alex, the data entry clerk turned criminal, was just beginning. His real punishment was about to start. In the aftermath of Alex's arrest, Megamart took swift action to strengthen its security systems. They patched the vulnerability in their refund process, implementing new protocols to prevent future fraud. They invested heavily in cybersecurity, hiring experts to identify and address potential weaknesses in their systems. They also implemented stricter monitoring procedures, flagging suspicious transactions and investigating potential scams. The Megamart fraud case became a case study in the importance of cybersecurity and the need for constant vigilance. It served as a wake-up call for other online retailers, prompting them to review their own security measures and take steps to protect themselves from cybercrime. Detective Reynolds, meanwhile, gained a newfound appreciation for the importance of even seemingly insignificant details. He realized that in the world of crime, every clue matters, no matter how small or trivial it may seem. He started paying closer attention to the little things, trusting his gut even more than before. He also developed a greater respect for the power of human intelligence and gut instinct. He realized that even in the age of computers and algorithms, there was no substitute for good old-fashioned police work. He even started carrying a small magnifying glass in his pocket, just in case he needed to examine a coffee receipt or a discarded piece of paper. Sarah Chen, his partner, couldn't help but chuckle at his newfound obsession with detail. Emily, the meticulous barista, was hailed as a hero. She received a reward from Megamart and a commendation from the police department. She was interviewed by the media and became a local celebrity. She used the reward money to pay off her student loans and start her own coffee shop, a small, cozy place that she named The Daily Grind 2.0. She made sure to keep the place spotless, paying close attention to every detail. And she always made sure to keep a close eye on the receipts. As for Alex, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He spent his days behind bars, reflecting on his mistakes and regretting his carelessness. He had thrown away his life for a few moments of fleeting pleasure. He had traded his freedom for a life of luxury, and now he had nothing. He often thought about the coffee receipt, the small piece of paper that had led to his downfall. He realized that it was a symbol of his arrogance, his complacency, and his disregard for the consequences of his actions. He knew that he had no one to blame but himself. He had made a choice, and he had to live with the consequences. He closed his eyes and pictured himself sitting in the daily grind, sipping his expensive latte, feeling like a king. He wished he could go back in time and change his fate. But it was too late. The coffee had been drunk, the receipt had been left behind, and the game was over. He was Zero Day no more, just another inmate regretting a life wasted on a dream that turned into a nightmare. The final scene fades to black, leaving the audience to ponder the fragility of success and the lasting impact of a single, careless act.